It's Thursday, June 13th, and welcome to the New York Amsterdam News Podcast. I'm Cyril Josh Barker, coming to you from the offices of the New York Amsterdam News in Harlem. On this week's podcast, our special guest is activist and Women's March co-president Tamika Mallory, who is going to speak with us about several issues impacting the Black community and some of the work that she's been doing. From her days working with the Reverend Al Sharpton's National Action Network to her more recent work with the Women's March, Tamika Mallory continues to be on the front lines in the fight for racial and gender equality. She was named Woman of the Year by the New York Amsterdam News in 2017. AmNews writers Fikiswa and Chinedu recently sat down with Mallory to discuss her current work.
Hi, Tamika. Thank you for joining us today. So we're just going to get right into it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. How did you get into activism, and how has the experience been like for you?
So I got into activism because my parents were activists. I think there have been two moments in my life that have sort of led me in this direction. The first was, my parents following them, or not even following them, literally being forced by all means necessary to go to rallies and, different activities around social justice, civil rights. I had been with my parents. My parents also went to a church that had social justice focus. So we've always been community activists. They, were the ones in the projects that everyone knew to go to if something was happening and you needed help from the NYCHA, basically, from the New York City Housing Authority. And so that was the first taste that I had in terms of being in the movement. But my son's father was killed. Now it's been 18 years. And so when he was shot and killed, I think everything that I had been doing and all the organizing work that I had been involved with, it sort of came full circle for me. I saw myself in it in a different way. It was no longer my mom and dad's movement and their work. I owned it as mine because at that point I had experienced tragedy. And at first I was struggling with the embarrassment that goes along with the story around, your baby father got killed, you're young. I was 18 years old, I was 20 when he was killed. But, there is a stigma. There is this whole statistic of, Black women whose fathers won't live or whatever, and being a single Black woman while raising a child. And I think for a while I was a little nervous about how people would perceive me, knowing that I came from a two-parent household. I had great opportunities. I was already involved in the work of the National Action Network, which is Reverend Al Sharpton's organization. So I was already doing those things, and then my baby father gets killed, and I knew people would be saying, wow, like, she's so fast, and he was a thug and a criminal and all of that. But after a while, I began to hear from so many other young women whose children's father was also deceased and had also, sort of experienced the same thing that I did. There were so many women who were saying my son's father was shot and killed, or he was stabbed to death, or he's locked away, that it again became like a full circle understanding for me that the reality was that America was failing Black men and failing Black families. And once I got that, once I could actually say that and not be saying it because someone else said it, but because I could see it and I could speak to my own experience, I owned the movement for myself and I took it from there. So that's been 18 years.
So just going back to, you said your parents worked with Al Sharpton with the NAN network. It seems a lot like when kids growing up, let's just say for instance, your kids, your dad's a pastor, they're going to drag you to church all the time. You know what I'm saying? So like, what made you take it upon yourself to be like, this stuff is important, and not to really kind of just walk away from it since your parents were forcing you?
Yeah, I mean, trust and believe that I was rebellious as hell. So there were many times because I've been involved in this work for about 25 years. So even before my son's father was killed, I was still going to rallies and really being out there. You know, when we think about right now, a lot of talk around the Central Park Five, or the Exonerated Five, as I like to, call them, and as I think they want to be called now. I was there from the very beginning. As a young girl, I knew the story. I knew Yusef Salaam. I knew Corey Wise, because I was in the work. And so, when you have parents who are woke, as we say now, my mother kept saying to me as I was speaking to her today, she's like, yeah, and you need to be awake. And I was thinking, that's the right way to say it, and so, they were woke. And when you have parents that are in the work, and parents who lead you in that direction, it's really a blessing that most people don't have. Because most people, their parents may be going to church, but they're thinking about, what God can do for them, what the church can do for them, and what they can also do to serve their church. My parents were thinking about the community. They were heavily thinking about the community, and not just from a perspective that you see a lot of churches. Their work is around the idea of like community restoration, sending children to school, having scholarship programs. My parents wanted to be, and they made sure we were involved in deeply rooted radical work. So police brutality, as I mentioned, the Exonerated Five, the Jersey Four, which were 4 young men who were shot on the Jersey Turnpike, while coming home from a basketball tournament or going to the tournament, one of those things. My parents were involved in that. They still to today maintain their support for Tawana Brawley. And in fact, I was speaking to Reverend Sharpton not too long ago, and he asked me the question, what is the difference between Tawana Brawley and the Me Too movement? He believed the woman. And my parents believed her as well. And they stood with her. So that's the kind of radical work that they were doing. So I think I was already radicalized. But let's be clear that I went and got pregnant. So obviously I wasn't doing too much movement work while I was doing whatever else I was into. I was in the street. I love being in the street. I failed out of school. And I was more attracted to the street life than anything else. I say in a documentary about my life that has been recently released, called This Is Personal, that when I was young coming up, I grew up in Manhattanville housing projects. It was just not too far from the Amsterdam News. When I grew up, I wanted to be married to a drug dealer. I thought that was what success looked like. Coming from an area, a community where the people who were successful, who had the flashy, shiny things, that's the work that they did, or the whatever they were involved in. The people who were working like my parents, the people who were nurses and corrections officers or whatever, they looked like they were just living day to day, check to check. But I didn't want to live that way. And so what I saw as an example of success other than the Cosby Show was people who were selling drugs and doing illegal activity. So for a while, I was drawn to that. And when my son's father was killed, it came to me. It's almost like when they say, train up a child in the way that they should go. So they don't necessarily, when the Bible says that, they don't necessarily hear or respond in the way that you expect them to in that moment. And having a 20-year-old son, I understand how difficult that is, because when I'm talking to him, I want him to do what I say right now, because I'm trying to sort of give him a cheat sheet on life, that if I tell you today, don't walk this way or don't go down that street, you should just do it. But he doesn't necessarily listen to me at 20. However, when he becomes a fully grown man, he will revert, hopefully, to the things that I have taught him. And that's what happened with my parents. They taught me, they took me, they influenced, inspired me, but then I went in my own direction. And it was up to me only to turn back to what I had been taught. And that's what happened when tragedy struck me personally.
Okay, speaking of the Me Too movement that you mentioned, what was your motivation in agreeing to being part of the Women's March?
There was so much that happened for me to agree to be a part of the Women's March. I guess the short story that I can tell today was that when Donald Trump was elected, and, you know, I talk about my son all the time as part of everything, because most of my decisions are made based upon how it impacts his life. You know, I live a pretty privileged life, but my son comes into contact every day. Well, let me take that back, because Black women, every single day, we are up against a wall that is impossible. But somehow or another, we climb it, jump over it, go around it, build a hole under it. Like, that's just the Black woman's story. But when I am making decisions about my work, I'm always considering how it will impact my son if I do or don't do, if I'm involved or not. And I think that what influenced me around the Women's March, well, the day that Donald Trump was elected, so it was the night when we knew he was probably going to win, and then the next day it was declared, right? 100% declared. And so my son, I got a call from his school saying he got in trouble for something. I don't even know what it was. And when he came in, we got into it. And at this point, he thought he was, you know, he was getting like, he thought he was grown. He was smelling himself. So we really had like a really bad encounter. And I remember saying to him, do you realize that this man has been elected as president of this country and how that's going to trickle down and impact your life, and you don't want to go to school and do what you're supposed to do? And so we were having this dialogue that was intertwining with the political landscape, which is not, you know, usually you're saying, you know, in life, you got to listen, you got to do right, go to school, make sure you get your degree, whatever. But I was literally using this dangerous moment that I knew we were in to help him understand how school was so important and how staying safe and listening to his mom was so important. So at the same time, I got a phone call from a friend who was asking whether or not I knew about this march. And because it was already moving on social media. Mm-hmm. So I went and I looked up the meme and the Facebook page, and I saw that there were hundreds of thousands of people already saying they were going. So when I got a call that same day, same friend calls back and says, hey, you know, he may have said it in the same conversation, you know, that the Women's March needed, or that these women, because at the time it was called the Millions Women's March, which was a big controversy because the 20 years before the Women's March was a march organized by Black women that was extremely successful. Everybody from Jada Pinkett to whomever was there, and it was called the Millions Women's March, organized by Black women. Mm-hmm. So now white women have come up with this march, and they're appropriating the name. So there was a big controversy online. Black Twitter, as you know, you don't want to get caught in Black Twitter. It's a dangerous place to be. You can't just get yourself out of it because they beat you till you're gone, like all the way. And so I was seeing all of that. But the friend called me and said, would you be willing to be one of the leaders of the Women's March? I said, listen, I know the women who are doing it, and they want to meet with you and our other sisters. Actually, they wanted Carmen Perez and me specifically, but we come in a threesome, which is Linda Sarsour, who's a Palestinian Muslim from Brooklyn, mm-hmm. Carmen Perez, a Mexican American, and me, the Black woman. And so I said they had to be involved, and the three of us came together. We had a conversation. In fact, the funniest thing is that Linda had joined Black Twitter and was online saying, I hope this march is going to be, inclusive of women of color, and that you all are not going to appropriate. Like, she was tearing them up. And we had to go online and say to her, hold on, we met with them. We're going to call you. And she wrote back, oh, on the internet. So we sat down with Linda. We worked through it all. And there were many bumpy roads when Linda and Carmen specifically wanted to get up from the table because they had bad vibes about things, and they should have. And I had those same vibes. We talked about it. But I knew that this movement was going to be big whether we were in it or not. And it was either going to be that the platform, the radical platform that we stand by, was going to be a part of it and at the forefront, or they were probably going to find some folks and sort of whitewash even our issues. Mm-hmm. And so I continued to work, understanding that we needed not just to be at the table, but to be designing the table, making the table, and then standing up in the middle of the table. That every time an issue was discussed, whether it be reproductive rights, we would make it reproductive justice. If it was a gun violence conversation, we would direct people to what's happening in the Black community. And we did that work. So what you saw on that stage the day of the Women's March, and since then in all the different activities that we've been doing, and what you see in all of us, and the growth of some of the white women within the Women's March, is because we stayed at the table, even though it meant that we were attacked and abused for being there from our own people and others.
Would you say that the march is an inclusive space then?
No, it's not inclusive. No. There are strong women of color in leadership positions. Mm-hmm. In the States, there are strong Black women, particularly, who are in leadership positions. But we deal with serious depression as a result of being a part of the Women's March. Yeah.
Can you explain that, Tamika, what you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to just talk about women in the States. Women in the States that are Black, who are leading chapters of the Women's March or part of the leadership of chapters, are constantly dealing with, the microaggressions that white women have perpetuated against us forever. They are constantly dealing with being told that they're angry or that they're divisive because they want to put the concerns of Black people at the forefront of the dialogue. They're constantly being undermined, because that's just the way many, I'm not going to say some, I'm going to say many white women operate, period. In fact, white women at the helm of the Women's March, the leadership nationally, know and have said and can see very clearly where they are extremely dangerous for the movement. They've said it. I've had one white woman I work with very closely tell me, don't trust us. In fact, she retweeted something about, Miss Maley, which is the woman who was attacked in the Central Park jogger. Let me call her the Central Park jogger. She came forward last week basically saying that she did not believe that the police and the prosecutor's office did anything wrong in this case, and that she wanted the evidence to come out to prove that they didn't do anything wrong, and ultimately that these young men, she didn't say this, I don't think, based upon what I read, but when you say nothing was done improperly, then that means that these 5 young men were in fact guilty of the crime that they were convicted of. Mm-hmm. And we know that they were not. Mm-hmm. So that was her statement. And so this particular white woman, who again is at the helm of leadership in the Women's March, tweeted it out and posted it and said, this is why people of color don't trust us as white women. Mm-hmm. So that's the mindset, because they've been able to see their own harm. Now, while saying this, they can still be causing harm and knowing it. And so there's a whole deconstruction that they have to work at. And there's a lot of people that tell me, stay away from that, don't do that. And there's some people who don't. But I believe my calling that I try to run from often is that I have to do that work. I have to do the work of calling a spade, and requiring a higher level of thinking and accountability for white women's actions that put people of color in danger every single day.
You get kind of feedback to get when you do that from these same white women?
Well, what happens is that a lot of white women agree and they begin to say, I have to do this work. I know I need to do this work. You know, they agree. And then, as far as I'm concerned, their husbands or other white men with power help to conjure up the next big, scandal that they can come up with against us. So during the time while we were leading the Women's March, anti-Semitism obviously became a huge issue. And when you look at it, there were really concerned members of the Jewish community that needed their questions answered. They were very concerned, and we respected that, and we did the work. We've met with rabbis, we've met with Jewish leaders, we continue to meet and talk and work together. But then if you look at the media coverage and you look at what was done and the type of attacks that we personally experienced, even though it was about guilt by association, if you look at that and the history around asking black people or demanding that black people denounce our own people and leaders within our community, that was more so about white men inserting themselves in the dialogue, and then right-wing press keeping the story going no matter what from day to day. So that's more so what we saw. But then one of the next biggest scandals within the Women's March was that we invited a number of elected officials, senior level elected officials to speak at our convention, the first women's convention in 40 years. And Bernie Sanders was one of the people who agreed. And his time that he had available was a particular day. The whole conference was named after Maxine Waters. The whole conference was about her keynote on Saturday. We were promoting that. She was our keynote. And because of the fact that Bernie Sanders was coming on the first night, the internet blew up with people who said that we were pushing Bernie's agenda, that we were putting him at the forefront, that we put a man in front. And I mean, this was like big. They were going to our sponsors, trying to make our sponsors drop the convention. All of this around scheduling. So what it tells me is that every time we do something that they think they can latch on to create some type of, distraction, they do that. Mm-hmm. And they're successful because many of them have created their own press, and this is, again, it's not, I wouldn't say it's Jewish media. I wouldn't say it's women. I would say it's right-wing media that jumps in and takes it on as their own issue. And sometimes we, as supposed progressives, don't understand how we're being used.
So I know you talk a lot about the your son's dad. So you were young when that event happened. You said you was 18. So looking back at it now, we're 19 years now.
20 I was 20 years old. So it happened 19 years ago. 19
years ago. What would you say is the greatest lesson you learned from that whole tragedy? And maybe something that you still from that event that you still take or you still think about or use today.
I didn't learn it back then. I was hurt, and I did what black women do. I picked up and kept moving and raised my son the best that I could. And there have been incredible people, from my parents to my partner to a number of other people who have come along to help me. My sister. My brother and just other family members have stepped in, and men from the community have stepped in. I learned the lesson as he's become a teenager, and now what he thinks is a grown man, right? Is that fathers need to be in the household raising their kids. Because I've given him all that I can do as his mother. I did all the things I could do. I said all the things I could say. But at this particular time in his life, what he needs is his father. Not just a man, his father. He called me today and said he's thinking about leasing a car. I said, well, for your first car, you don't need to lease a car. You need to get this kind of car, a nice Honda Civic or something. And, he's a good driver, but he still has a lot of learning to do, a lot of getting comfortable. And you beat up your first car. That's just the way it goes. And he's going back and forth with me. In his mind, he probably thinks he's getting a Mercedes-Benz because that's how these kids think today. And I realized that if he was having this conversation with his father would have already told him, this is how you do it. And more than likely, he would respect his father as a man explaining this to him, different from how he hears it from his mother. What he hears from me is protection and I don't want him to shine. I don't want him to be lit. I'm trying to dim his light. But what young men usually hear from their father is more strategic. Oh, this is how I do this. And I recognize that as his mother, as I said, I've given him all that's in my toolbox. And at this point, what he needs is his father as a strong man in his life to take him the rest of the way. And I learned, because I used to be we don't need no man, we gonna make it happen because the men ain't here and they ain't doing this and they ain't doing that. I think it's a crime against humanity to rob a young man and woman, young girl, young kid, young man, young woman, whatever, young boy, young girl, of their father. I think their father and their mother needs to be in the household.
So, what advice would you give to your younger self?
When people ask me that all the time, I need to find a good answer for this because, I don't know. I think about my younger self, there's so many conversations that I would have, but I think rather than going in the direction of sort of the negative things like what I should do better or whatever, just looking at my life, I'm in a space where I am really trying to own what God has done for me and how many great opportunities I've had in comparison to people who grew up with me. I came here today and happened to see a young woman that I know from my childhood, and she didn't see me and I didn't want to embarrass her, but she was clearly down on her luck, on her blessings or whatever. And I was just thinking to myself, we lived in the same community. Our parents were friends. But for the grace of God, there go I. And I think what I would say to my younger self is just hold on. Take your time. Because very soon you're going to do things. God is going to move in your life in ways that you cannot even imagine. Exceedingly and abundantly great. What I've touched, the history that I've been able to make, walking 250 miles from New York City to Washington, D.C., the Women's March with 5 million people around the world. Not many people, black girls who came from the projects on 133rd Street and Old Broadway in New York City, have experienced what I've experienced and have been a part of making it happen, not just standing on the sideline and being there, not a rally attendant, but literally shaping these movements. Not many people have done that. And so I would say to myself, what you're about to do is so powerful that this little argument you're about to get into, or this dude you chasing that ain't worth a damn, or whatever, not going to school, all those things, you don't understand who you are and what you need to get ready for. So read more, write more, think more, involve yourself more in learning and education and making yourself brighter and, you know, and more knowledgeable, so that when your moment comes, you are able to speak from a place of clear and articulate authority versus what I have experienced, which is the insecurity of the I don't know.
And what would you say to young black girls who are trying to go the same route as you in terms of activism and just trying to make a change, especially because, like you said, we are typically labeled as angry black women. So how do you rewrite that stereotype?
No, I don't want to rewrite it. I'm angry as hell. Black people are catching hell in America every day, and we should be angry. And I would say, when people tell you that you're angry, tell them hell yeah, and use your anger to be a catalyst for consistent pushing against the system. That's what I would say. I would tell young women that it is going to be difficult. I'm not going to tell you about all the beautiful those things, but it's going to be hell, because I have personally experienced a lot of pain over many years, not just from the Women's March, you know, from other things that I've been a part of and been committed to, that it's going to be hard as hell. But in the end, when when they say that dash, you know, you die and people ask you about the dash, sort of, you know, they're trying to write your obituary or come up with a sermon about your life. That dash needs to say that you help move the needle for your people in your community. And in order to do that, you have to be prepared to sacrifice something, you know, and I'm so glad that I did. And I will continue to do so. I think anybody who wants to be in activism, Harry Belafonte once asked us, are you prepared to give your life for what you believe in? If you're not prepared to give your life, go find something else to do. Because this movement needs people that will die in a second, the blink of an eye, for what they believe in. Because if you're willing to give your life, that means if anything short of that is okay, right? If you're willing to die for what you believe in, then anytime you get to live, that's a good day, no matter what the situation is. And I would say that for me, accepting that I'm prepared to give my life has given me freedom, not bondage.
What would you tell Tamika, these young people who are aspiring journalists and are journalists already? How would you encourage them to find a path which will lead them to greatness and greater impact?
My father says in my documentary, my niece says she wants to be a police officer, and she says, and my mother doesn't want me to be a police officer. Her mom has worked in law enforcement. My father worked in law enforcement, and she says, you know, I want to be a police officer, and she says, and I want to be an activist. And my father says to her, this is a great piece of this documentary that I love. My father says, that's right, Skylar, that's my niece. Whatever you are, be that and an activist. So if you're going to be a lawyer, you be a lawyer who's also an activist, a police officer who's also an activist. And I would say to you, two young people, be a journalist who's also an activist. Because the activism will inform what you journal about. It will say how it will direct how you show up, where you show up, when you show up, and on whose behalf. That's the only thing that we can ask, is that you take activism just as serious as you do your craft. So wherever you show up, people need to be saying, oh damn, here they come again. Like they do with Josh. Oh damn, he's going to ask all of these real questions. Oh damn, Naya's going to say, who we voting for? Why are you voting for these people? That's the type of journalists that we need. And there are many of them. And you all, I hope, will join and continue, because you're already doing it. join the group that's doing that work. You're not going to make as much money. That's just the truth. You're not going to make as much money. But they say, particularly as a black woman, you need 7 streams of income in order to be able to give over wealth to your family. So being a journalist and being an activist may not be enough. You may have to have something else going on the side, writing for people, helping people like me write things that we need. That may be something you have to do to make that extra money. But be able to go to bed feeling good about the fact that your words help to move the needle on behalf of our people.
Thank you.
Final question real quick.
It's just anything else you'd like to share with us that we didn't talk about?
No, I mean, I think we've already talked about a lot. I probably have talked too much. But I'm really proud to see the two of you here, and I'm excited about the fact that AmNews is doing the generational work. The work of having a Herd Boy and you all here at the same time. Because that says that the legacy will continue, and very similar to what Mr. Tatum did in terms of ensuring that Ellie Tatum, his daughter, is here to keep his legacy alive, and that other young people were in the pipeline. That is what is happening with you all, and you should not look at it as just a job. You need to understand that there's a legacy here, and you are upholding a legacy, and you now have a responsibility of ensuring that the 10-year-olds who want to be writers have a space in your work as well.
Okay.
I think you've really went over everything besides the fact that you and my mom have the same birthday. I saw that.
I just celebrated my birthday on June 8th.
Oh, wow. But I guess just a final question. I know in 2014, Mayor de Blasio appointed you to, helped you guys help create the NYC crisis management system.
It wasn't Mayor de Blasio.
It wasn't him?
No.
Oh, okay.
Mayor de Blasio and Jennifer Jones Austin, because she was one of the co-chairs of his transition committee, appointed me to the criminal justice committee subcommittee. So
you guys created the NYC crisis
management system was developed while Michael Bloomberg was mayor, who told us that he would never give us money for our work because he did not see where there was data to support the fact that grassroots organizers could help to stop gun violence. He believed in policy, which is why Everytown USA, an organization that he helped to start, focuses a lot on policy. They are now, after many years of us having to kick in the door, thanks to Erica Ford out of Queens Life Camp, and she really was the brainchild behind developing the crisis management system. And A.T. Mitchell was involved also of Man Up in Brooklyn, and I was more so the person who had access to meet with all of the elected officials in the city. And so Bloomberg told us, no, we have been able to move Everytown to being more concerned about community organizing and grassroots organizers. They have a long way to go as far as I'm concerned. But under Bloomberg, we were told we would never be able to get money from him to fund grassroots work. But we were strategic, which is important. And young people are not often strategic. And young activists need to be a little more strategic sometimes. We have a all or nothing sort of mindset, which I understand sometimes we have to have that, but it must be coupled with very strategic work. And I'll say that because while Bloomberg was telling us no, there were people getting ready to run for mayor. And so we went to Christine Quinn, who was running for mayor. She was the speaker of the city council at that time, and others. And we said, there's violence in the black community. If you want to be mayor, one of the things you need to commit to is helping us raise money or have money, grant money to grassroots organizers who at the time couldn't even keep their doors open, their lights on. They didn't even have offices. They were working out of their living rooms and maybe getting ready to lose their apartment because they were so committed to the work. And under his administration, which again, he said never, but because we were strategic in pushing other points, we were awarded the first $5 million. Not we, in terms of the collective, but not me, because I never made a dime off of it. It was more so about the activists who are out there, the advocates. But we were awarded the first $5 million. Today, we're up to a little more than $30 million for groups all over the city who are formerly incarcerated, people who work within the grassroots movement, who are now a part of the city's safety plan. And in the target markets, wherever the target markets are located, where the crisis management system is up and running, there has been a serious decline in violence. Some communities have gone hundreds of days with no shootings, and they used to have 2, 3, maybe 4 shootings a day. So that just goes to show you, when you invest in the people who live in the community, the people who look like those who are out there perpetuating violence, that's the real model. Because you can try to put policy all around it. And if people are hungry, if people are not being properly educated or feeling as if lost and helpless and hopeless, they're still going to find ways to kill each other and themselves. So what you have to be able to do is provide hope. And most people want that from their own people who they trust.
All right. Thank you so much, Tamika, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
It was good meeting you.
That was AmNews writers Fikiswa and Chinedu with activist Tamika Mallory. That concludes this week's podcast. You can pick up the latest edition of the New York Amsterdam News on newsstands and get updates online at amsterdamnews.com. You can also keep up with us on Facebook at NY Amsterdam News and follow us on Twitter at NY AmNews. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. Thanks for listening.